All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We're so glad you could join us for this community conversation today. We're just admitting a couple last participants. And all right, here we go. Before I begin today, I do want to acknowledge that what we call Park County today is the traditional and current homeland to many Indigenous peoples, including the Cheyenne, Blackfeet, Sioux, Apsalica, among others. For hundreds of generations, people have cared for, loved, and lived in relationship with this special place and sustaining its abundance, the wildlife, and the wild places that we all get to enjoy today. At PCEC, we really try to honor this legacy and are committed to working together to steward this place for future generations. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Erica Lighthizer, and along with Max Yortsberg, I serve as the co-managing director for the Park County Environmental Council. And for those of you who are new to us, PCEC is a local place-based conservation organization dedicated protecting the land, water, wildlife, and communities of Yellowstone's Northern Gateway. And we're working to create a more resilient future for all life to thrive here. We're a little different than many conservation organizations because we work to protect both public and private land, and we do this in a variety of ways. Sometimes we do this by playing whack-a-mole and responding to threats, and increasingly, when we can, we're working to plan ahead for a vision for the future in a community that we all would want to live. One of the best tools that we have at our disposal to protect open space, to protect wildlife habitat, and to protect working farms and ranches and our quality of life here is through proactive community planning. Go ahead and hit the next slide, Carrie. If you can jump to the next slide. In the story we're sharing today is a great example of this approach. For those who are not familiar, Suce Creek is a small tributary of the Yellowstone River. It's a quiet agricultural and residential valley that sits right next to the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness. It's also home to wildlife like grizzlies and moose. And for those of us who live here locally, it's a place that many of us like to visit year-round. Next slide, please. So last year, when rumors spread about a luxury commercial development with 100 cabins, a spa, a restaurant, PCEC shared this information, broke the news to our community, and we stood alongside the neighbors as they organized. We offered some support and some connections along the way, but really the heart of this effort is the residents themselves. And with the steady and super tenacious leadership of Maggie McGuane, who we'll get to hear from today, the community came together and within 1 year created the Suce Creek Citizen Initiated Zoning District to ensure the valley's future really remains what it is today, home to working ranches, residents, and abundant wildlife. I think this effort really shows just what can happen when neighbors come together. They put aside their differences and they focus on shared values to work to protect the places they love. So here's our agenda for today. Before we dive in, this webinar is being recorded, so please stay muted until we get to the Q&A. We're going to leave plenty of time for conversation and for folks to learn more. And to help us unpack this story today, we're joined by two incredible speakers and experts. Jen Madgic, she's a community planning expert that PCEC has been working with since 2018, and she has over 20 years of experience supporting conservation organizations like ours with her extensive planning expertise. She's going to share some insights on why communities create citizen-initiated zoning districts or zoning districts, some possible planning tools that our community can use and the difference between more reactive approaches and proactive approaches. Then we'll get to hear from Maggie McGuane. She's a lifelong Livingston resident, a writer, and a humanitarian, and she really spearheaded the effort to get neighbors to organize and protect Suce Creek. And after after their presentations, it'll be Q&A. So with that, let's get started. And Jen, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Erica, and thanks to everyone for joining. I'm thinking that we need to be in Maggie's backyard today because it looks absolutely gorgeous there. So perhaps after the meeting.
Yes, you're all welcome.
So I am going to give a background specifically on zoning. It's going to be just a high level of how zoning works, particularly in Montana. And if you can go to the first slide, Carrie. So in my experience, I've worked in Montana as a planner for some time. I've worked in the city realm and in the county realm for a combination of a dozen or so years. And activities that have prompted the urge or the motivation for zoning are what you see on the list here. So a wedding facility is proposed in, a dead-end street nestled in the mountains, a music venue out in the middle of nowhere, billboards, a gravel pit, a luxury development like we've seen in Suce Creek, and just a lot of these uses that aren't particularly compatible with a historical development pattern in a rural area. And they come in at such a scale that is, again, not compatible with what has existed on the landscape. So people come with a certain panic over these activities and ask for some kind of protection. Next slide. And that protection comes very often in the form of zoning. So you'll see the little blue book. I've got the little blue book here. I've got to get it updated. I don't even know if they're still publishing these, but it's super helpful to just look and understand kind of the basics of Montana statute when it comes to planning. So when it comes to zoning in a county, there's 3 different kinds of basic zoning. Part 1, or 101 zoning, is considered the citizen-initiated zoning. Part 2, or 201 zoning, is county-initiated. And then there's something called emergency or interim zoning, and that comes out of statute in the 206 section. Next. So the purpose of zoning, and again, this comes right out of Montana planning statutes, the kind of primary purpose is that first bullet, to promote public health, public safety, and the general welfare of a community. And as you can imagine, that's quite broad. The purpose can also expand to conserve natural resources, protecting adequate light and air, facilitating infrastructure, ensuring orderly development, imposing certain development standards, and in some cases, protecting aesthetic resources. Next. So part 1, the citizen-initiated zoning. This is the first type of zoning that was made available to counties in Montana. It occurs earlier in the planning statute, thus the 101. And you'll hear this in the Suce Creek example, but in citizen-initiated zoning, you've got to come with certain standards in order to kind of go to the governing body and ask to be zoned. And one of those is you've got to come with a petition of at least 60% of affected property owners. The area being zoned needs to be greater than 40 acres. And just as an aside, this zoning district that's being proposed by citizens would not have to meet a growth policy. Next. In Park County, there are these Part 1 zoning districts. They've been put in place for a number of years. There's Cokedale, Cook City, East Yellowstone, Araya Creek, in the Paradise Valley, and then now we can add Suce Creek. Next. There's also 201 zoning district. So this was a zoning district that was created by the county commissioners a few years ago. It's specifically to regulate billboards along US Highway 89, East River Road, and Old Yellowstone Trail zoning district. That's the name of the zoning district. So it's regulating billboards, which thank goodness for this effort and this adoption of the zoning district. And a second 201 that was contemplated in Park County in recent years was called the Conflict Mitigation Zoning District, and Park County commissioners at the time, kind of at the direction and pressure from the public based on a number of uses that were causing conflict throughout Park County. Some of those uses were a tire burning facility, gold mining, gravel pits, wind farms, and so forth. Kind of kept, going to the county and saying, hey, we need some kind of protection from these uses that stand to threaten our rural way of life, our rural landscape, threaten perhaps wildlife habitat, air quality, creates issues with traffic, dust, noise, smells, whatever it happens to be. So the county came up with something called conflict mitigation, or the Agricultural and Rural Residential Preservation Zoning District. It was kind of rolled out during COVID. The county commissioners ended up kind of backing off from it for a variety of reasons. The flood happened. Once again, it was COVID, so it's kind of hard to get people together. Next slide. It's interesting. I happened to look up AI, which I use frequently to kind of get answers to some of my questions. And AI said that Park County has already adopted the agricultural and rural residential or preservation zoning district. So perhaps we should just go with it and pretend like it's adopted. So next slide. So just a couple of high-level takeaways. Not all zoning is the same. Zoning started in the early 1900s, basically in LA. And LA at the time had wash houses that were being developed in residential zoning district or residential neighborhoods. And people wanted to kind of separate the wash houses out from neighborhoods. So that was kind of the impetus behind zoning in the early 1900s. New York City took on zoning a few years later. And basically, it was over, which totally makes sense for New York City. The height, the bulk, the general uses that were coming up in New York City. And then zoning really took off in the country in the 1930s. Bozeman was zoned in the 1930s, and I presume the same for Livingston. So zoning from New York City to LA to Bozeman to Livingston to Suce Creek to wherever you find a county or a community or a city with zoning, they're all meant to kind of fit a certain set of circumstances and certain goals. So it's not a one size fits all, and that can be the real beauty of zoning. And in general, it's better to be proactive than reactive. Like I explained, there have been so many instances of people reacting to a certain use coming into their neighborhood and rushing like crazy to get zoning in place. How great it would be to kind of have zoning in place already to address whatever comes up. And in general, too, it's best if zoning complies with your growth policy. Your growth policy is kind of your overarching document meant to kind of look at a county or a city as a whole. So it really can kind of look at things from a higher distance, take in all of the factors that are important to a location or a locality, and it just is more of a comprehensive sort of perspective. And next, and I will pass the baton to Maggie.
Maggie, you may need to unmute.
There we go. Am I unmuted? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Hi, I'm Maggie McGuane, and in some ways, I feel like I'm here just for a broader overview of how we got to where we are. I know that and sort of some guidance on what I've learned from it. Obviously, PCEC was a huge part of us discovering what was proposed on Suce Creek. And I can't agree with Jen more, preferably these things are proactive, done with the county coming together. And I can look back now on our process and see mistakes that were done. There's a panic that is going on when you're doing reactive part one zoning. That is unfortunate. Like and by the way, like we're all laymen here on Suce Creek. I was in charge of the overview of what do we do about this proposed development. We had a couple of neighbors who were more in the weeds as far as the CIZD goes. But in looking back, I do wish that we had more governmental tools that we had at our use when this first came up. Obviously, those were the first things that we explored. How do we combat something that will impact residents so much like this development? What tools do we have? And kept, getting the answer of there aren't really any. As far as these part one zoning projects, again, I'm an overview person, and I think the most important thing for everybody coming together was sort of letting go of differences and deciding that our primary label for ourselves was as Montanans and residents of Suce Creek, or Park County in general, because we also included Indian Hills. Those residents came to us. And very challenging getting everyone in the same room and having a conversation, because we go through our day-to-day lives assuming things about our neighbors, about ourselves. And so kind of trying to let go of all of those labels. And I really encourage people, whatever it is facing Montana, to think of yourself as a Montanan first. Think of the neighbor that you think you don't have much in common with as a Montanan first. And then moving on from there. As we came together to discuss our options as Park County residents, um, it was it was challenging. I feel like everybody had to really let go of their own idealized version of what zoning looks like. And I think that if the county ends up implementing something, that will be really important for all of us. You know, for me, I'm so glad that this CIZD happened. Is it the kind of zoning that me, who sort of leans toward conservation, would choose? No, of course not. We had to try to figure out something that was suited to everybody, had a kind of low touch impact. In this case, the best example is density. Um, we had to include some density, and we ended up doing it per 10 acres, which is very dense. That's very dense for a rural area, but it gave the most flexibility to people who wanted to um, continue to build on their property, possibly sell pieces of their property. Like, we really wanted to make sure that we weren't in panicking about this resort, suddenly making huge impactful choices, or getting so stuck in the weeds of our own beliefs that we couldn't come together with neighbors who had very different ideas about what growth should look like. So a lot of compromise. And I really I feel like that's the most important thing for Montanans with every issue coming up, like just thinking about compromise. As far as our part one zoning specifically, we also tried to build in like a lot of workable um, uh, kind of, I don't know, exceptions, right? So lots of possibilities once it was implemented to work with neighbors if they wanted to, you know, do something slightly out of range. So options for variances, et cetera. Again, maximum flexibility. I think that zoning in Montana has taken on, and by the way, really important to say, like, I knew nothing about zoning at all. So I've learned a lot in this process. And what I've learned is that it is so wide what is possible and what it makes possible. And so really tried to create a document that was very focused on keeping this residential and agricultural, but was really flexible for property owners, so that it didn't become an example of this sort of like super hard ass zoning that Montanans are so afraid of. Um, and I think that's really important for people to recognize. The process itself, I would do differently if I had it to do over again. Like, I've become such a believer in proactive planning so that you're not under the gun over the course of the year. I mean, once we decided to pursue a CIZD, there was a panic within weeks. Like, is it done? Have we figured it out? We've got 60%. That's all we need. Move forward. And so the kind of timeline doesn't, you can kind of not be as thorough as you'd like. It keeps me up at night sometimes. And I wish I'd done that a little differently. I wish that we had, I been on top of absolutely every detail. We ended up having to, kind of task things out, and I think that I would like to think that my experience can be a roadmap for anyone else who has no choice but citizens initiated zoning districts. And I would say to anyone, please come to me. I will give you a really honest take on how to do this. Again, what I would do the same, what I would do differently. Um, but the overview and the lesson is, ultimately everybody wants the same thing. Try to find that common denominator and build off of it. And be prepared to make a lot of concessions. Be prepared to be really flexible with your neighbors. We get so entrenched in, but this is the best way, and this is, and sometimes right now with no zoning, it has to be what works the most for the most amount of people? And what do I have to concede in order for us to kind of find a good middle ground? I would say that everybody affected made big concessions, but they were okay with making those concessions. And interesting, in some ways, I sort of feel like it's ideal because, on the one hand, everyone's happy that it passed, but nobody really feels like they got their way. Everyone's like, I wish it had gone this way. I wish we had stricter this. I wish we had less strict this. And that maybe is the sign of something that kind of hit the mid range the best. Um, but you know, that's been my experience. I wouldn't wish this last year on anyone. It was really hard, and choosing to sort of be the face of it was especially hard. It felt really vulnerable. I would much prefer that that be a project taken on by county government. You sort of become the face to every disgruntled person, every person who's Monday morning quarterbacking it, every neighbor who wishes you did it faster. And it's a lot to take on. So I'd like to think that we can all move forward, but again, like, not entrenched in our views about what is absolutely the best for Park County, but what can we all agree on works pretty well. And I feel like Park County is a place of very passionate beliefs, and maybe, trying to appreciate our passionate beliefs, but also realize that we have to get some sort of a working model that everyone can agree upon. And again, like, set aside your labels you have about yourself: environmentalist, conservationist, animal lover, or, developer, builder, housing advocate, and just go, okay, I'm a Montanan, you're a Montanan, we're all Montanans. What is our common ground? And I feel really strongly about that. So that's my experience. Hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you for sharing all of that, Maggie. There's so much great advice in there. So, yes, thank you for sharing all that. And I mean, we should all take a moment to thank Maggie and all the residents of Suce Creek. What they accomplished there is truly incredible in such a short period of time. So, thank you on behalf of all of us at PCEC, and I know the wider community, for all you did to protect this really special place for future generations. We really appreciate you. And yeah, thanks to Jen too, and all the experts. There were so many people supporting this effort behind the scenes. There were people that showed up to county commission meetings and spoke in support. Just thank you for everyone. It really was an amazing thing to bear witness to be part of. So thank you. And I think with that, I mean, I bet you there's a ton of people on the Zoom, so I bet you there's questions. And I would love to open it up to that next. If someone wants to, I mean, you can come off mute and ask a question. You can pop your head up or your hand up, and we can call on you. Let's start there. And Carrie, if you can see if anyone's raising a hand or.
Erica, it sounds like it looks like there is a question here in the chat, so I will read it. John Mills, in the slides, there were 8 bullets related to purposes of zoning. Are they equal weighted or is there a priority?
Yeah, thanks, John, for the question. I would say that first bullet that talks about public health and safety and general welfare for sure is kind of the overarching principle, and everything kind of to some degree takes a second seat to that. But it really is up to the governing body to look at an individual situation and weigh that criteria and see, how it fits best. So it's it's kind of a unique sort of recipe that comes together. And I wouldn't say that a governing body needs to go through all those bullets and say, oh, we covered this because some might not be applicable and some might be more applicable in certain areas than others.
Thanks, John, or thanks, Jen. Scott, I see that you have your hand up. Do you want to ask your question?
Thank you. No, just not a question, just wanted to say I'm Scott Rosenzweig and I'm the State House Representative for House District 57, um, in which Suce Creek sits. And just wanted to first of all, thank you and thanks to all the citizens and Maggie for taking care of everything so beautifully. And sorry, I can't turn on the camera right now, but second, if there's anything at the state level that would be of assistance, meaning as you went through the process and identified what was useful and or not helpful to you, if you found anything in particular, that's how state law gets changed. You guys identify something and then you tell me and then we work to make a law. So if there's anything that I could do to support this in the future, just let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes.
I would actually love to follow up with you because I think that there's ways to make this process even less conflict prone. And that is something that I would love to see happen. Personally, I'd love to have like sort of a little, reader available for anyone that they get if they're going to be affected by one of these zoning districts. But I would love to talk about this because I think the less conflict around these things, the better. And sometimes it's a little tweaking of the process. So love to sit down and have a cup of coffee one day.
Cool. Thank you. I put my number in the group chat, so anybody's welcome to contact me anytime.
Thank you.
Jen, did you have anything to add to that?
Thanks for the offer, Scott. I think there's always areas for improvement in our planning statutes. The 101 zoning district has been tweaked a little bit here and there, particularly like the percentage that's needed to bring it forth. But yeah, stay tuned. I have a lot of little ideas.
Cool. Thank you. Well, that's how law gets made in Montana in the citizen legislature. So thanks.
Maggie, there is a question in the chat for you from Dan Austin. I'm happy to read it. You stated earlier you would go about the process differently if you could do this all over again. Could you expound on what specific aspects of the process you would change? What legislative aspects of the process would you tweak?
Ooh, Dan, that's a good and complicated question. I don't know that I have a right answer. In an ideal world, I could have spent 3 years on this. Really being very thorough, not just about, our discussions, but really thorough on making sure that everybody was really well read on the subject of Part 1 zoning. I wish we had sort of more preparatory time, more time for conversation. And I realize that inevitably these things, aren't perfect, but I do wish that it had been something that felt like we explored, every opinion, every aspect of it. And I'm sort of a perfectionist, and so now that it's in the rear view, I think like, oh, if I'd had, a few more months to work on that, or we could have tweaked this, and then I have to remember, and this is where, like, I'm not a professional. None of my neighbors are professionals. And so ultimately, in a perfect world, we're all pros at this, or we're all experts in how these mechanisms work, but we aren't. And so that's probably what I would have changed. Just more time. Wish I had more time. I wish I'd spent more time on it. Um, we didn't feel that that was an option for us. But that's the best answer I can give you.
So just a
And I
really quick
can,
follow-up. Oh,
yep,
sorry. So
no,
so it
go
sounds like
ahead.
time was a major issue. Do you wish that there was a way legislatively that the clock could sort of be stopped so that at least temporarily, so that there could have been more time to gather the information and support needed?
You know, that's a great question. And it was something that came up right away. Was there some sort of like emergency pause that could happen? And we understood right away that that was probably not a tool available to us because it would have been a county-wide emergency pause. We weren't interested in, you know, pausing everything all over. We were just trying to figure out what to do in our own area. Um, and so yeah, I wish that there was something that could give people a little more time. You know, it was a mad rush. I mean, I had a lot of 14 to 16-hour days talking to other drainages, trying to figure out what our zone was. In our case, it was our specific concern was this resort, which you know included a bar, etc. So very different than being concerned about a gold mine. We spent a lot of time talking to people who lived in zones that had, you know, bars and live music and events, and what was the kind of space and span that got affected by those things. Because it was such a public concern, you know, floods of phone calls. We had people all the way to Deep Creek saying, you know, if you do a citizens initiated zoning district, can you include my drainage? So there was so much reaction in it. And I did try to kind of, I'm a big proponent of not being reactive, but impossible not to be in some ways. And so trying to figure out what you're reacting to and how much is reactionary and how much is proactive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jen, do you want to add any additional information about the emergency zoning?
Yeah, not the emergency zoning per se, but just about living in a perfect world. So in a perfect world, Park County would have countywide zoning. It would be a proactive, citizen-driven effort to zone the whole county. So you have a layer of protection to start with. And once again, kind of back to my just understanding of zoning, that zoning can be very many things from LA to Suce Creek, that even within Park County, you can have a variety of different zoning districts. And it does not have to be scary. And I think in Montana, zoning has had a history of being scary because perhaps some of the roots of zoning come from places like LA or even Bozeman. And so education to kind of explain that not all zoning is the same. Zoning protects private property values and private property rights. You can craft a really rural zoning district that meets, you know, it could look very much like what the Suce Creek Zoning District looks like. So that to me is the perfect world. And I understand it's a heavy lift. And just as the Suce Creek Zoning District preparing was a heavy lift, you know, a certain number of citizens, but it would take, and you really need it is kind of leadership from the top to say, hey, we're not going to put this on the citizens so much anymore. We very much want to involve them, but we want to stop kind of this reactionary cycle we have going in Park County of just responding time after time to different activities that come forth that are mismatched with your rural county. So that's just kind of my follow-up is as much as possible, get out in front of what's coming your way.
Can I add to that? I would really love to see people in the agricultural world really get out in front of it, because I think one of the reasons that zoning has sort of a bad rap in Montana is exactly like Jen said, it's coming out of urban areas. We have very different needs in a rural area. And that was a really that was a challenge for me here, because we certainly had proponents of zoning in our neighborhood or opponents who were coming at it from a very suburban or urban perspective. And the ones who wanted that style of zoning, it's like, that's never going to fly here. Really hard to get people to understand that this isn't like, we're not zoning a neighborhood grid the same way that the suburbs are zoned. We're looking at impacted areas because there are very different things. Luckily, we have some really good examples of places that are impacted, particularly by venues, you know, loud music. So you're looking at noise, traffic, drunk driving, the watershed. And I think that, you know, I would really like to see rural residents start to think of it as a tool instead of thinking of it as something that urban or suburban residents come in and try to sell us on. Very different. Rural zoning is very different. You're talking about watersheds and, you know, uh, grazing issues and protecting producers' rights, all of those things, very different. So that's who I'd like to see kind of spearheading these efforts.
Real
Yeah,
quick, I very often compare zoning to baking a cake. And let's say you're going to go out and bake a cake. You can bake a good cake, you can bake a cake that tastes horrible, chocolate cake, big cake, little cake. That's kind of how zoning is meant to be. It's, you know, it's the sky's the limit. You can do a good job, you can do a bad job, and everything in between.
yeah, I think one of the things I love about this Suce Creek example is how this district was really created by the community for the community and really took into account the diverse perspectives, the diverse points of view, the different needs to really acknowledge the all the residents that are in this area. And so, I mean, I think as we move forward as a county and as a community, um, taking the lessons learned from this approach and how successful it was and how quickly that got done, I think really has to do a lot with that approach that you took, Maggie, and others. And I think you also, Maggie, have said this before, and you did as well today. You know, this really could be a model. I've heard you say you'd be willing to, you know, share the district and the process and encourage people to reach out to you if they have specific questions. I know since the zoning district passed, folks have been communicating with us saying, "How do I do this in my neighborhood?" And I think there's a lot of interest in other neighborhoods or maybe other localized areas, getting their community together, getting their neighborhood together, and starting to have these conversations. Um, I don't know if you have any reaction to any of that, Maggie and
I
Virginia.
think the first thing to say, and I would certainly say it to anyone approaching, like, how important is this to you and what are you willing to sacrifice? You know, everybody had to sacrifice something in this case. Some people, the motivation was sacrificing in order to protect their property values. Some people, it was emotional. Some people, it was inherent beliefs about conservation, etc. But, you know, I'm the best example, by the way. We're probably one of the tiniest pieces on Suce Creek. And from the moment we bought the property, our plan was to build a huge barn and studio. And we're maxed out on our buildings on our property. We don't have 10 acres we can separate off and build again. So, but you know, if you care enough about what needs to happen, you might have to sacrifice your sense of being a like warrior for conservation and protecting everything. You might have to sacrifice your dream barn. But if it is it part of being a member of a community? Is it part of overall protecting something that you care about? And if you're willing to make those sacrifices, then it's important enough for you to pursue. And hopefully your neighbors feel the same way.
Cool. I have a question. This is Scott. Uh, just wondering, how many, are there enough incidents of Park County wrestling with zoning in recent memory to sort of jog the citizenry into supporting county-wide zoning? And actually the preceding question to that is there anything worth doing at the county level that you would feel, Maggie, or anybody who was involved in this process, that you would want to go up a level and try to encourage zoning it, or at least a zoning option, something like that?
I'm going to give a very unpopular answer, which is not yet. We have got to get better at talking to each other. We've got to get less entrenched. Like there's so many, you know, so many different types of people in Park County, and the divides are widening. Like we have to figure out a way that people start talking to each other more. We have to bring into the fold part-time residents in a better way. We have to learn to be good neighbors. Like, hey, I would love it. Don't get me wrong. Like, I feel like we need it desperately right now as like growth goes in directions nobody could imagine. But I gotta tell you, like, we gotta get to know each other as Park County residents first. We gotta find common ground. And I fear that an effort right now on the back of this Suce Creek thing will just create more fear and division. I mean, you know, that might, I think there needs, I wish there was sort of an in between part one and like, if there was some in between type thing that allowed for neighborhood type zoning with the assistance of the county, that would be amazing. But man, like, I don't know, we just got to get to talking to each other, you know, it and really just educating people about what this is.
Well, that sounds like a good interim step too. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, Maggie, I tend to agree. And I think, you know, there's a lot of advantage to maybe more of an incremental approach and build momentum and you know, bring people together. You know, so if folks are interested in this kind of model, yeah, start having conversations with your neighbors. Maybe invite Maggie to come speak in your neighborhood. I think there's paths forward, but in terms of like a sweeping big county wide, yeah, I think it would just, yeah, divide people a lot and really set us back a little bit. So um, let's keep building from the ground up by the community for the community. I think that's the best approach we have right now.
And ultimately, I would like ours in, you know, there are other zoning districts that have had some issues. I would like ours, and we all feel this way in the neighborhood. Like, how do we make sure that the people included in that district feel like it's a workable plan? How do we help them work through issues? How do we work through the county? How do we, you know, how do we be supportive in those ways? And it's hard because it ultimately now is up to the county. But we really, again, want to be a model of like flexibility and good neighborliness, and did try to build that in from the get-go.
I think you spoke to this a little bit, Maggie, but there is one other question from Whitney. I'll read it. You said neighbors had to make concessions to compromise to get the zone. What kinds of concessions were you and the neighbors making?
I would say the hardest concessions were the density, dropping that density to 10. And that was done with a couple of neighbors specifically in mind, who felt that there would be an unbearable financial impact if they didn't have that safety valve of like, if they had to, they could separate off 10 and sell it. And I think people, initially felt like, if we're going to do this, let's do it as cohesively as possible, and with as much protection as possible. And I think if you asked most people in the district, that would be the biggest one. Like, oh, they would have chosen less density. And I totally understand, but we sort of went with, how do we make the lightest touch impact so everyone can feel pretty good about it? And then my barn, I'm bummed about my barn. But the great news is I can apply for a variance. And by the way, like, the nice thing is that nobody, we're all sort of on the same page. Like, if I applied for a variance to build my barn, everyone would be like, great, build your barn. That's sort of the attitude everyone has taken in this.
Well, as we close up today, Maggie, do you have any last story to share about folks coming together? Anything that surprised you, or any sort of anecdote to leave us with?
I would say that what it's left me with is lifelong friendships with people that I didn't think I had anything in common with. And that goes to the county level. I've been so happily surprised at how much I do have in common with fellow Montanans who have very different political views from myself. Like, my takeaway is, get to know your neighbors. We're going to need each other. Get to know your neighbors, talk to them. If you're wealthy and from out of state, talk to them, not through their property manager, invite them over, take walks with them, like, really be a member of your community, and you'll feel better served, and you'll understand the needs of people whose needs are different than yours.
It's brilliant. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Really appreciate you all. As I said earlier, this is recorded, so we'll put it on YouTube so you can share and view later if you missed some of it today. Thanks for being here, and to be continued. Thanks all.
Thank you.